Morning, my name's Simon, welcome to Bennett's BikeSocial, welcome to Portugal, and welcome to the launch of Honda's 2023 Transalp.
So here we are, the first few miles on Honda's 2023 Transalp, here on these fantastic roads in Portugal. I mean, look at this. The forecast today was for rain, and we have had a little bit of rain, but look at this, it's glorious. So, without any further ado, let's get into the Transalp, the new Transalp, a bike that's eagerly anticipated by an awful lot of people. And I do feel under a bit of pressure to come up with something relevant and say something meaningful. I'm not quite sure what order to do things in. Normally I'd go through the spec and then tell you what the bike is like at the end. To be perfectly honest, there are things that I want to say right now about how this bike feels like to ride. So I'll do them first and then I'll get into all the spec stuff. And what I will say is that what Honda have built here is an absolutely fantastic road bike. I wouldn't even know if you blindfolded me. I wouldn't be able to tell you that was a 21-inch front. There you go, I said it. I couldn't tell you. It feels like a 19-inch. The way you can stick this thing into bends, burying it on its nose, on the brakes, and it doesn't have that sort of floppy steering of a 21. It feels so solid, so stable mid-corner. I mean, you can see now, I'm just trickling around these bends, but it just steers like a 19-inch. It's incredible. Yeah, what a fantastic road bike. Very, very compatible with the human form. Honda do that so well. That thing where you get on a bike and you just know, this feels like I feel at home on this bike. I feel like I've ridden it before. There are pros and cons to that, and maybe I'll get to that later if I can remember to get into the nuance of it all. But anyway, yeah, what a thing. I mean, you know, this engine is fantastic. And look at that, just pin it on the brakes and tip it and turn it. Metzeler Karoo tyres are really good. I'm quite glad we've got these on here instead of the other option with the Dunlop Trail Max Mix Tours, which I'm not all that confident on. These Metzlers on these roads feel fantastic. So there you go, there's a flavour of the bike and what I think about it. Let's get into the Transalp. I'll skip the boring history about how in 1987 there was the first Transalp that took over from all those Paris-Dakar singles like the XT600 Paris-Dakar and the Ténéré and the XL 500M Honda and the DR600 Paris-Dakar Suzuki. And then Honda came along with their V-twin engine with the Transalp in 1987 and said, here's your enduro bike, but we're going to give it a full fairing and we're going to give it a twin engine. How'd you like that? We liked it a lot. And then everybody followed suit, and then somehow everything got to 750 and they built the Africa Twin instead. And over the years the Transalp sort of receded into this really practical all-rounder role, which suited it really well, and it has got a loyal fan base. I've met some of them, funnily enough, in the Alps. So it has its fan club, but it grew in engine size. 2001 I think it was, after quite a few years it went to 650. In 2008 it became a 700, got a 19-inch front instead of 21, and that sort of sealed its fate as a practical, vaguely adventure styled day-to-day tool. Really, really good bike. But there it sat doing nothing for a long time. Anyway, now we're back with the Transalp, and I'll give you the position regarding Suzuki's V-Strom 800 and the Ténéré later on. But for the meantime, let's rattle through the spec real quick. Right, you can tell a lot about a manufacturer's intentions by the way it plans its launches. And so Suzuki's V-Strom 800 DE, which I was lucky enough to ride a couple of weeks ago in Sardinia, that was a 2-day launch, and we rode about 200 miles, just over, and about 80 to 100 miles of that was off-road. That was a lot of off-road riding. Transalp, it's a day launch, okay, can't read too much into that. About 110 miles I think we'll have done by the end of the day. Done 5 miles off-road, and it was pretty slimy as well. But that gives you some idea of Honda's kind of rationale for this bike and their thinking about its positioning. And it is as we suspected, as I said in the 800DE video, which you can watch somewhere else on the Bennett's YouTube channel. I did say that I suspected we have this axis here, and we have off-road at the left-hand side, on-road at the right-hand side. Yamaha's Ténéré and Aprilia's Tuareg sit to the left of centre, with a little bit more of that off-road bias on that compromised line. I think Suzuki's V-Strom 800 sits slap bang in the middle, and I suspected, and I think I'm right, that Honda's Transalp sits to the right-hand side of that centre line, and it is very much a road bike. So what have we got with the Transalp then? Let's just go through the real bare spec, just while we trickle through this village. It's the same engine as the Honda Hornet CB750, and you can watch that video, which is elsewhere on the Bennett's YouTube channel, for a more deep dive. For now, I'll just say it's a 755cc 270 degree parallel twin, making 91 horsepower at 9,500 RPM, making 55 pound-foot of torque. I'll tell you what, I'm going to spin round at this little roundabout and go back. 55 pound-foot of torque at 7,250 RPM. Here we go. Look at the way this thing is so civilised, and the energy that this engine has got. Anyway, yeah, keep talking about the engine. So that's the engine bare performance, and in terms of those other 4 bikes in the class, that 91 horsepower is pretty much at the top of the class. It's, you know, it's 8 horsepower or so, I think it is. Or no, that's 7 horsepower more than the Suzuki, and quite a bit more than the Yamaha and the Tuareg. And how does it feel? It feels less vibey than the Suzuki, I'll say that for a fact. And it's such a good engine. I mean, it revs quite hard, it's quite a revvy motor, but it doesn't feel top end, it doesn't feel peaky. It's got plenty of bottom into it as well. Really flexible unit. Again, there's something about it. It does feel a little bit more road biased, in the sense that it sort of has got more of a classic linear road performance curve, whereas the Suzuki was very much kind of weighted towards the bottom end. And I did notice off-road on the Suzuki, I could trickle along in second gear with the clutch out and it would not stall. This definitely feels more like a road engine when you take the bike off-road, in that, you know, when you get down to those really low RPMs, you do have to juggle the clutch a little bit and just keep the engine spinning. But anyway, that's getting into some fine detail, which I'll talk about later on. So in terms of the spec, that's the bare spec for the engine. And in terms of the chassis, it's the same frame as the 750 Hornet, with some strengthened areas around the swing arm pivot, around the rear shock mount, around the engine mounts. So it's not quite an identical frame, and it's a very different subframe. It's wider, it's longer, and it's stronger, because obviously it has to deal with pillions and luggage. Still non-detachable though. I did sort of query that with Honda, and they pulled those faces that sort of said, yes, we know, you know, we'll take our customer feedback on board. Make of that what you will. We have 43mm Showa forks, unadjustable except for preload, and we have a Showa rear shock. We have 210mm of ground clearance, which is there or thereabouts for the class. I don't think it's the best, but it's there or thereabouts. We have 855mm seat height, no, 850mm seat height, which is again, I think it's the lowest in the class, and I'll talk about the riding position in a minute. We have axial calipers. This actually has got it has got what looks like a fake radial arm on the bottom of the fork, and again I asked the engineers about that, and they smiled and said, oh no, it's not fake radial, it's to protect the caliper from stones and grit. So anyway, it's on tubed rims. Quizzed Honda about that. They say they are slightly cheaper than tubeless rims, and they are slightly heavier as well. And I said there'll be far more people getting punctures than there will be dinging rims, and they nodded wisely. So never know, maybe one day. So anyway, so there you go. So 21 inch front, 17 inch rear. We have a 17 litre tank, which at just over 47 miles to the gallon is going to be good for probably, I don't know, 180, 190 miles before you run out. So the fuel light will be on around about 140, 150. Suzuki's 20 litre tank will probably give you another 30 or 40 miles over the Honda, if that matters. So that's a real quick, let's go through the electronic spec. Lovely set of clocks. It's not an Africa Twin style mess of buttons here on the bar. It's actually quite simple to navigate, so that's quite good. They've streamlined it. Again, it's exactly as per the Hornet. and they're quite customizable. You can have different displays. I've got this kind of like, you can have sort of clocks if you like, but I've got this bar display here. So where were we? We're banging through spec. 208 kilos weight, that is indisputably 22 kilos lighter than the fully fueled Suzuki. And I double checked, this is definitely a wet weight 208 kilos, say Honda. So that is a lot of weight, and you can feel it when you throw the bike about. The forks, you know, the bike really sits flat, it doesn't have any dive. I mean, you brake and then look, it dives to a certain point, but it doesn't dive any further. And you get on the gas, it doesn't squat at the back. I mean, it's soft suspension, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't do too much of that pitching. Look, stroking it mid-corner, it's not making the bike change line. So yeah, suspension, good stuff. Like I say, I suspected it wouldn't be quite as, well, it's not as adjustable as the Suzuki, but as a base setting, good set of forks, good shock. Where else were we? Rabbiting on about stuff. So in terms of bare spec, oh, there's somebody there. Oh, there he is. In terms of bare spec, it doesn't come with a quick shifter, which the Suzuki does. It does come with a screen, which the Suzuki doesn't. The screen is actually pretty good when you're cruising. It gives you plenty of wind protection. I'm running out of road now, so I'm trying to think of what else it is I need to talk about before I get to the end of the road. Price, really important. I mean, I could have mentioned that at the start. I may well have done and forgotten. £9,499. This whole bike is framed by that price. It's 1,100 quid cheaper than the Suzuki. It's 600 quid cheaper than the Ténéré. Now, you know, you could argue it sits on, if you want an off-road parallel twin, middleweight, for want of a better word, then yeah, get the Ténéré, because that definitely has a looser, ganglier, more off-road feel. To be honest, it looks like you could crash it off-road and you wouldn't cry a tear. You wouldn't shed a tear. Whereas this is such a pretty bike. And I briefly, when we were pulling away from a coffee stop, I looked in the mirror, and for a split second I looked at that red and that kind of fading blue in the tank, and I honestly thought, oh, someone's brought along a 1987 Transalp for us to have a look at, because it has got a few nods to that bike. It's a pretty looking thing, and it's a classic Honda finish. Everything's just neat and tidy. There's no dangly bits, there's no bits of styling that you look at and stroke your chin and go, yeah, not sure about that. There aren't many bikes from other manufacturers that you can sort of say that about. I think we're coming to the end here now. So yeah, everything has to be couched in terms of that price. You could argue, well, why is it £2.5 more than a Hornet? Well, it's got more fairing, and it's got different wheels. It's a different animal. In its market, oh, here we go, we're right at the end now. In its market, it is well placed, and I think it's going to be very popular. But I'm going to do a bit more. I'm going to have some bite to eat, I think. I'm going to do a bit more riding, and then I'm going to get back to you with some sort of conclusion. Anything I've missed out, spec-wise, there's some packs that come with the bike. There's an adventure pack and an urban pack and a travel pack. I'm going to put all that stuff in a big box at the end of this video so you can look at it there, and I'll try and find some prices for it as well. Am I going to bash a bike behind me? No, I'm not. Right, there we go. Let's see what's going on now and find out what everybody else is up to, and I shall come back to you at the end of the day with a bit more of a comprehensive conclusion. Well, there we go. That's been over 100 miles on Honda's 2023 Transalp. And it's a little bit difficult because there's I feel so much pressure to explain adequately what this bike is and where it fits in the world. But I'm in a bit of a unique position because I think there's only two of us that have actually ridden the V-Strom 800DE and the Transalp. And I think I've ridden the Ténéré 700 as well, and I've ridden the KTM 790 Adventure, so it gives me a bit of a perspective on where this piece of the jigsaw fits in. And so right off the bat, I'll tell you that if you wanted the Transalp to be Honda's Ténéré 700, it's not that. This ain't that bike. What this is a really, really sound road bike. It doesn't need to be an adventure bike. You can't tell it's got a 21-inch front. Just when you sit on the thing, it could have almost kind of
like an F900 XR styling. It's that sort of, just a really, really good road bike. That's its sort of overriding characteristic. Now, when you get to the Ténéré 700, there's something about that bike, as we said before on different videos, where it hit the sweet spot, that adventure bike sweet spot, at the right price, with the right size and the right blend of off-road and on-road. And we talked about that axis, where we've got off-road on one side and road on the other, and how the Ténéré and the Tuareg sit just to the left of that, towards the off-road side, on that compromise. I think the V-Strom sits right down the middle, and this really does sit on the road side. So I'll try and explain. I think I've talked about it in the riding video, about how there are some clues from the fact that Honda, 5% of this launch was off-road. With Suzuki, it was 50%. The way it hasn't got aluminium panniers aren't an option for it. This is very, very clearly a road bike, and it handles like a road bike. The engine from the Hornet has got loads of go in it. It's a really funky little thing. You can really rev it up and it really flies. I've got to say, it's got longer gearing than the Suzuki. I noticed that sort of at 80 miles an hour in top gear, it was sort of around about 5,000 RPM. And I think from memory, the Suzuki was 5.5. And those vibes were beginning to creep in and it was feeling a little bit uncomfortable. This vibrates less than the Suzuki. It's just a fact, it does. And it's revving at about 5,000, as I say, at 80 miles an hour. So it's a little bit longer geared, which again is great for road riding. It's not so good off-road. And to be honest, we've only done a short amount of off-roading today. We haven't done a huge amount, and it's been in the wet. So it wasn't like we got on the V-Strom, where it was, like I say, 100 miles or so off-road in the dry. But what I can tell you is the engine characteristic is better suited to road riding. It's not as well suited to off-road riding. Because the Suzuki's a bit shorter geared, you could pedal around hairpins with the bike on tick over without having to trouble the clutch. This is a little bit harder to control at those kind of really low speeds off-road for that enthusiastic amateur, shall we say. And you do get the feeling when you ride it that you're riding a road bike that you're taking off-road, as opposed to the Ténéré, when you get the feeling that this bike was built with off-road in mind. So, you know, it's not a question of whether something's better or worse. It's kind of where it sits on that scale. This is definitely more of a road bike. And so let's look at a little bit of how it performs on the road. We've talked about the engine. We talked about how good it is, how smooth it is, how much power it's got. 90 horsepower. Back in the day, if a 600 sports bike made 90 horsepower, you'd be pleased with that. This thing does 90 horsepower, and it, you know, it's fast. It will fly when you wind it up. And the handling, as I say, the way they've sort of disguised this 21-inch front, it could be a 19, the way it digs into corners, the way the brakes really, you can brake into the corner and then come out of it, and it hasn't got any of that kind of wallow and front-end dive or back-end pitching that the Ténéré has, because it's an off-road bike. It has that gangly vibe. The steering on this is much more measured, much more steady. It's not heavy steering, it's very, very agile. It's too light to be heavy steering, 208 kilos, dripping wet, and you can really feel that difference. But there's other things about the road performance that we really like the Mezler Karoo tyres are really good, much better than the Dunlop mixed tours, I think they're called, tour mixes, that were fitted to the V-Strom. In the slightly dodgy conditions this morning, these things have got loads of confidence, and again it sort of helps make you feel like that 21-inch front is much better on the road. So what else can we talk about? Well, I suppose the other thing we should talk about is the riding position, the way it makes you feel. You very much sit in the Honda. This seat is pretty soft. It's actually got a little wrinkle in it here where I've been sitting on it all day. And after about 130 miles, it was just starting to ache a little bit because it does compress. The Suzuki is a little bit flatter, a little bit harder. It's a little bit more cupped. I think the Suzuki seat is more comfy on the road and the riding position is slightly better. This, you sit in it a lot more. It's very natural. You know, there's nothing about it that makes you sort of think, well, this isn't going to work. But again, the way your legs are folded up and the way there's plenty of leg room, it doesn't shout off-road, it shouts road bike. But anyway, I definitely prefer the Suzuki. But then on engine vibes, this thing is much, much smoother. So there we go. So that's the handling sorted out. And then you get, you know, I mean, it's really hard to get away from this price. It's £9,499, which is 1,100 quid cheaper than the Suzuki. And you spec this if you want with your quick shifter, which is an extra, what, 250 quid. You can spec these handguards if you want, which the Suzuki already comes with. I mean, you can spend that 1,100 quid and get it to the same level almost as the Suzuki. And I've got to say, you know, with the extra screen, well, this screen is really good too. On the Africa Twin, I always had the suspicion that it was a little bit thin, a little bit flappy, gave you a bit of turbulence. We've just done a few miles on the motorway, no turbulence coming off this screen. It really, really works. So again, the Suzuki hasn't even really got a screen, it's got a tiny little visor. So there we go. So I'm trying to place the bike in the world for you. That's sort of as good as I can get. Like I say, it's definitely more road orientated. It's definitely less off-road orientated. I mean, I'm sure someone like Rally Raid could dress it up with all the kit and put the right tyres on it and put all the right stuff on it, and it'll look great and it will probably perform well off-road. But out of the box, I would say if you want to go off-roading on this sort of middleweight, for want of a better word, parallel twins, I'd pick the Ténéré, and then I'd probably pick the Tuareg. And then if I wanted to do a bit more of that road thing, a bit more of a compromise, I'd pick the V-Strom. But if I wanted a road bike that could just about nip off down a fire trail and get away with it, I'd take the Honda. Right, that's a really, really quick overview. If you have further questions, which I'm sure you will, please write them in the comments down below, and I shall come back and I shall answer them. And we'll have to do it the old-fashioned way with writing rather than talking. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.
Yeah, I think we can safely say the Transalp has got one hell of an engine and one hell of a road holding performance. I think as a road bike, this is pretty exciting stuff. Right, there you go. Was that exciting enough for you? Now, tell me about the bike. Right.